Navigate a Roman street after sundown, and you are surrounded by dense, wooden apartment blocks and open fire pits. The urban environment of the first century was highly combustible, unsanitary, and systematically lethal. This timeline illustrates a standard Roman lifespan. The statistical failure points cluster heavily at the very beginning. Between 10 and 15% of women did not survive childbirth, and the infant mortality rate was severe enough to threaten the baseline population. To withstand this level of biological attrition, the Romans organized themselves into a rigid corporate structure, the familia. It operated on an entirely different logic than the modern nuclear family. Looking at this network map, you can see the true scope of a single household. It encompassed a husband and wife, their biological children, adopted adult heirs, freedmen, and a massive dependent class of slaves, tutors, and laborers, all living under one roof. At the center of this network sat the paterfamilias, the oldest surviving male ascendant. He maintained absolute legal and financial authority over every person and asset within the household. Because of the severe mortality rates, the individuals occupying these roles were constantly dying. A household had to figure out how to maintain its corporate identity and wealth when its actual members required constant replacement. The Roman solution was domestic cult religion. The daily rituals of the household functioned as a highly engineered social technology designed to maintain the integrity of the familia. Every major life event was mediated by strict religious protocols. These rituals legally and psychologically processed individuals into and out of the household to ensure the wider structure never collapsed. The physical anchor of this system was the hearth. It housed the living flame of the household, overseen by Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. This lararium was the central shrine for worshipping household deities. The dancing figures represent the Lares, guarding the physical estate, and the Penates, securing the food supply. Below, the serpent represents the genius, the procreative life force of the paterfamilias, guaranteeing the family name. The maintenance of this shrine required daily labor. The paterfamilias acted as the chief priest, while his wife and the household slaves were legally required to prepare food offerings, weave garlands, and tend the fire. Through the daily mandatory worship of these microcults, the inhabitants were forced into a cohesive unit. The act of tending the shrine structurally enforced the hierarchy of the household every single day. This calendar illustrates a Roman infant's first week of life. Because early infant mortality was frequent, families deployed a biological defense mechanism. They did not formally name or recognize a child at birth. They waited until the 8th day for girls and the 9th day for boys. If the infant survived to this date, the family enacted the dies lustricus. This specific ceremony granted the infant legal personhood and formal Roman citizenship. The deposito began with the infant placed on the bare earth, acknowledging its vulnerability. Looking at the vectors, this downward motion is immediately followed by an upward action. In the tollere, the father lifts the child, officially accepting it to raise. The family then cleansed the child of birth pollution through a lustration process. This involved animal sacrifice and the reading of bird omens to determine the new citizen's future. In this statue of a young Nero, you can see a round amulet hanging from his neck. This is the bulla, an apotropaic artifact given during the dies lustricus. It was worn continuously until adulthood to ward off supernatural harm. Every subsequent year, the family celebrated the individual's birthday by repeating the sacrifices of the dies lustricus. By enforcing this rigid sequence, the dies lustricus transformed a biologically fragile newborn into a legally recognized, spiritually protected node within the corporate structure of the household. As children reached maturity, they were utilized to expand the network. Roman legal contracts explicitly stated that marriage was formed liberarum querendorum gratia, for the purpose of producing children. The legal framework dictated the bride's status. In a cum manu marriage, she legally entered the authority of her husband's family. In the increasingly common sine manu marriage, she retained her financial ties to her biological father. A Roman bride wore a specialized 6-braid hairstyle, a reddish-yellow veil, and a white tunic. She was deliberately styled to resemble a Vestal virgin, visually projecting the strict chastity required to guarantee the legitimacy of her future children. Look closely at this stone relief. It captures the Junctio Dextrarum, the ceremonial joining of right hands. Standing directly behind the couple is the pronuba, a matron of honor who had only been married once, acting as the supervisor of the union. Following the handshake, the bride was escorted from her father's house to her husband's in the domum deductio. By tracking the wedding torch, the tata, through the streets, the procession served as a public, geographical witness to the legal transfer of the bride. Arriving at the groom's home, the bride smeared animal fat on the doorposts to signal fertility. She was then physically lifted over the threshold to avoid tripping and offending Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Once inside, the groom presented her with fire and water, a formal ritual known as the ignis et aquae communicatio. That same night, the bride offered a single coin to her new family's lorarium. The presentation of fire and water, followed by her coin sacrifice, executed the final transfer. The bride was legally severed from her past and grafted directly into the survival mechanisms of her new domestic cult. The offboarding process for a dying member of the familia maintained strict physical symmetry with birth. The dying relative was lowered back onto the bare earth in a final depositio, and the corpse was later carried out of the house feet first, reversing the normal head-first delivery of an infant. This stone relief depicts the collocatio. The deceased is laid out in state on a prominent couch in the atrium, surrounded by torches and mourners, providing the community a designated space to process the loss. The body was then carried to the forum in a massive public procession called the Pampa, where a male relative delivered a formal eulogy detailing the deceased's specific contributions to the family ledger. In this marble portrait, the central figure holds two highly realistic masks. During the funeral procession, actors wore these exact kinds of wax masks to impersonate the ancestors of the deceased, visually representing the unbroken historical lineage of the house. Through the funeral rites, the deceased transitioned into the de parentes, the ancestor gods. Rather than disappearing entirely, they were reclassified and retained as an active part of the household's religious community. Because a corpse was considered a severe biological and spiritual contaminant, the living family underwent a 9-day mourning period, culminating in the soffitio, a strict cleansing ritual utilizing fire and water. The funes executed a specific structural goal. It ensured that the physical death of an individual did not disrupt the spiritual continuity or legal standing of the wider familia. Anthropologist Catherine Bell defines ritual as a mechanism for integrating thoughts and actions. By acting out heavily structured behaviors, human beings regain a sense of control when faced with extreme uncertainty. In the Roman life cycle, the elements of fire and water were constantly deployed to mediate boundaries. They were used to cleanse the pollution of birth, to finalize the transfer of a bride, and to purge a house of the dead. When we look back at the network map of the familia, the true function of these rituals becomes visible. Individual nodes flash, move, and disappear as people are born, married, and buried, but the central architecture remains perfectly stable. The biological individuals suffered massive turnover, but the office of the paterfamilias and the flame of the hearth were completely immune to death. The household cult neutralized the chaotic demographics of the first century. It absorbed the shock of constant mortality through relentless, standardized daily habits. The longevity of the Roman Empire was not rooted in the marble temples of the state pantheon, or even the legions. It survived because the private, corporate machinery of the familia was built to never die.